been watching Looney Tunes for as long as I can remember. I've grown up with all the characters and catchphrases and learned every comedic beat. I've watched the animation style evolve, the musical score change tone. I've also witnessed Bugs Bunny being extremely racist.
Here's yours, Bulllegs. Here, one for you, Monkey Face. Don't shout, there's plenty for all. Here you are, Slant Eyes.
Okay, yeah, let's gloss over that. I've also grown up with some fantastic Looney Tunes games. I started with Bugs Bunny Lost in Time, which is a truly epic 3D platformer. But today, we're here to talk about Looney Tunes Racing. And Looney Tunes Space Race, but we'll start with the former. Looney Tunes Racing is, and I know this is going to sound crazy, a racing game, but not just any racing game, one which rivals that of Mario Kart 64, Diddy Kong Racing, and Crash Team Racing. Right out the gate, you're greeted with so many references to classic cartoons, including Smokey the Genie. What? This guy had one appearance in a Bugs Bunny cartoon called A Lad in His Lamp, and yet he's the frontrunner for one of this game's biggest modes. That is genuinely amazing, and I bloody love it. At the main menu, there's a couple of options to choose from. The Championship mode, with 3 tournaments getting progressively harder, a single race mode to play any track you've unlocked, and you unlock some tracks that aren't in the tournaments, one of which is incredibly epic, but we'll get to that later, a multiplayer mode to play with your friends, and finally, the ACME challenges. 15 fairly challenging tasks, each with a different gimmick, ranging from collecting tokens that spell bugs in order to beating a rival by 2 seconds, which is way harder than it sounds, by the way, to not hitting the walls in a race 3 times. There's a bunch of really cool challenges, and if you want to unlock all the characters, you better get good at the game, but the character unlocks are pretty worth it. You start with the standard ones you'd expect, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Wile E. Coyote, Lola Bunny, Taz, and Marvin the Martian, but you can also unlock characters like Elmer Fudd, Granny, Sylvester, Yosemite Sam, Rocky and Muggsy, Porky, Gossamer, for some reason, Smokey, even Duck Dodgers is a character. It's super cool how much diversity is in the character selection. You can tell they really care about the franchise and the fans. But where's Sniffles the Mouse? Sniffles doesn't get enough representation. Look at him, he's adorable! All of this stuff is great, but it is meaningless if the gameplay doesn't feel good, and oh, would you look at that, it certainly does feel good. It controls very similarly to the kart races mentioned earlier. You accelerate, you drift, you fire weapons. Simple, but effective. The drifting really emphasises turning on the back tyres, and that really helps stabilise you when you stop drifting. As with any game, learning the drifting rhythm may take a bit of time to get used to. Every kart racer I've ever played feels different in that regard, but it feels really good, especially when taking those tight turns, which this game doesn't shy away from at times. The weapon system is fascinating in this game. There are tokens with a different number on them scattered throughout the tracks. The numbers range from 1 to 3. These numbers correspond to a tier. The more of these tokens you collect without using your weapon, the better weapon you get. This is a genuinely genius way of designing the weapons, and the weapons aren't half bad either. Tier 1 sends a coconut custard pie with whipped cream at your opponents. Tier 2 throws a mini-bomb. Tier 3 sends a rain cloud that strikes the person in front of you. Tier 4 a homing pie, but this time with cherry. Tier 5 forces an ACME anvil on everyone in front of you, and the final tier is invincibility. I personally think Tier 5 is the best, and unless you're first, Tier 6 is kind of like a trap. An extra challenge to make sure you actually get the right numbered token, or you might miss out on an item that'll help get you into first. The music for Looney Tunes, and really any cartoon, is kind of its own genre. An orchestra performs a 6 to 7 minute non-stop piece using strange instruments and constantly changing zany melodies to capture the feel of a scene in a way that's only captured in a cartoon. By comparison, the soundtrack for Looney Tunes Racing does a great job. You do get the sense that lots is going on, and the soundtrack has a very odd gimmick where if you get hit, overtake, get overtaken, move on to the final lap, etc., the music does a mini jingle in the middle of the piece, interrupting the music entirely before going back to it. On paper, this is an utter disaster and has no right to work at all. But honestly, it's actually kind of charming and works to match the zany ideals of the cartoon genre. Finally, let's talk about the tracks. As someone who's a die-hard Looney Tunes fan, this pleases me the most. The tracks are carefully crafted to be designed around cartoons you'll recognise. Wascally Woods and Forest Frolics are based around the Hunting Trilogy cartoons. Those cartoons being Rabbit Fire, Rabbit Seasoning, and Duck Rabbit Duck. The tracks Planet X and Duck Dodgers' City are clearly based on Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century. Or are they? You see, this is what I mean about the lovely references they've put in. Whilst Duck Dodgers City may be named after Duck Dodgers, I put it to you that this is actually more resembling a cartoon called Rocket Squad, where Daffy and Porky are futuristic detectives. Sure, there are traces of Duck Dodger stuff within the city, but I think the architecture is closer to that of Rocket Squad, and that means so much to someone like me who loves that cartoon because it really doesn't get much recognition. Anyway, moving on from the fanboy moment, there's What's Up for Doc, which is clearly based on the cartoon of the same name. Gossamer's Castle is based around the cartoon Water Water Every Hair, which is a fantastic cartoon, though it's more the evil scientist who owns the castle as opposed to Gossamer, but let's not split hairs. Or blow them up. I won't go over all the tracks, but there's an absolutely stellar track called You Belong in Pictures, based around the cartoon You Ought to Be in Pictures. I wouldn't have expected this track, but it's absolutely marvellous to drive around the Hollywood sets. And now finally, for real this time, I want to go over the bonus tracks which please me a lot. There's Planet Y, which is just going around an oval on the planet's rings, the Acme Factory, which is nuts as a track, really make sure you save up to get your invincibility. And finally, the biggest surprise being Wacky Land. Porky in Wacky Land is a black and white Porky Pig cartoon of Porky going to Wacky Land to search for the lost dodo. And it's a bizarre genius cartoon. Honestly, a lot of Looney Tunes' early work could be memes, they're way ahead of their time. But this track is actually in black and white and filled with references to the cartoon, which is truly awesome. Anyway, that was the PS1, this is the PS2. And also the Dreamcast. Let's go to space! Looney Tunes Space Race is a completely different game to Looney Tunes Racing. It's released on the Dreamcast in November of 2000 and 2 years later on the PS2. I haven't played the Dreamcast version, so I'm going to be basing my experience on the PS2 game. I have 2 PS2s and 3 copies of the game, not a single copy worked on any of my PS2s, so I've had to emulate it. I'm really sorry, but you can't say I didn't try. You'll see various glitches of arms being extended, and I'm sorry, there's nothing I could do, that's just an emulator glitch. I hadn't played the game in over 15 years, and hearing the jazzy opening theme brought nostalgia to me unlike anything I've felt before. I remembered virtually nothing of this game, and that was a glorious shock. So yeah, first off, the music is completely different to that of Looney Tunes Racing. It's jazzy, all of it is, and that's not a bad thing at all. It's really catchy and works super well. They even throw in a couple of references to the previous soundtrack. The Pyramids of Mars track has traces of the music from Planet X in Looney Tunes Racing. Whether that was intentional or not, I don't know or care, I loved it. Space Race is both a longer and shorter game. It has more tournaments, but whilst Looney Tunes Racing had 18 full tracks and 5 mini tracks in the Acme Challenges, this only has 14 tracks, but hey, size isn't important, it's what you do with that size, right? Okay, not always, but in this case, the gameplay, whilst completely different in every single way, is really fun, and they've got some super cool ideas. In the game, you race on little hover ships, and instead of drifting, you have a sort of propulsion mechanic that launches you violently left or right. It's not a good substitute for drifting, but given enough time you do get the hang of it, and it's not too bad to use. You of course have the weapons, which range from rockets to ray guns to Acme safes, weights, pianos and elephants landing on people's heads. But you also have these little cans scattered around the track. Collect 5 of them and your meter will fill up, allowing you to use a boost, and it's a pretty substantial one. It can definitely help you catch up if all hope seems lost. The tracks themselves are pretty fun too. They're well designed and some of them have super neat gimmicks. This game isn't going out of its way to be based on cartoons since it's set in space, but it does have a couple of nice references. Some of them you will have to search hard for, but they're worth it. For example, a cinema states that it's now showing Space Jam 28, which is pretty funny. I do wish they added characters like Yob from Rocket by Baby, or maybe specific rides from Moron Mountain in Space Jam. There's a track based on a theme park, so it's a bit of a missed opportunity. The best thing about this game though, for me, are the tournaments, and that's because they actually all have some fascinating gimmicks. I'll give you a couple of examples. Don't touch any weapon crates. You touch them, you get no weapons, and you get hurt. It's an interesting idea since it's placed fairly far in the game and you've conditioned yourself to pick them up. Races tend to shift fairly often, you switch places a lot, so staying in first isn't always a guarantee, especially when the AI gets better, which is why a gimmick of points being awarded per lap is fascinating to me. 7 laps, points at the end of each. I was fortunate enough to be on a track I was very confident on, and I didn't get screwed over by weapons, but if I had, it could have been a very challenging contest, which is awesome. Finally, I'll talk about the true anarchy that is falling weights. No weapons, you don't need them. There's falling weights all the time. It is absolutely insane, and I love it. These are just a couple of ideas they had, and it is brilliant. I wish more games had stuff like this. Once you've done that challenge in one of the tournaments, it's unlocked in free play mode. You can play with your friends and do those challenges, and it will be super dumb. These two racing games are very different from each other, and yet carry the Looney Tunes vibe, albeit in a different way. Whilst Looney Tunes Racing thrives on making you feel like you're part of the cartoons you know and love, Space Race makes you feel like it's just a futuristic world where falling weights is commonplace. And at the end of the day, that's very Looney Tunes. Haha! That's all, folks! Elegant.